Hello everyone, now welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today we're back with Amos Zweig for a new video conversation. And we found out that there were multiple topics that we could discuss, very interesting topics, and we ended with concluding that we could start off by talking about a philosophy that is named anti-natalism, which I discussed with some students, other students, on a philosophy lecture not that long ago. And the philosophy of anti-natalism is the idea that it is bad to bring human beings into existence, that human existence and human life is bad and miserable and contains many bad things in general. And that therefore it is not good to exist, that to exist is actually a bad thing, and that and at least some anti-natalists seem to think that it is wrong to bring human beings into existence. And I can also mention that there was a very intriguing and special scenario, I'm not sure which country it was, but it was in the West, of a person who sued his parents for bringing him into existence, for making him become living in the real world. So he sued his parents. Why did you bring me into existence? Why did you make me become a human being in the real world when it's terrible to live, essentially? So that goes back to the anti-natalist philosophy. So we figured out we could discuss that today. So I suppose we could start off, Amos, by me asking you what you think of anti-natalism in general, or perhaps if you want to also discuss how we should relate to the issue, how we should sort of argue or discuss about this philosophical topic.
It's a good question how we should approach this topic. I had just a couple of quick thoughts as you were presenting the topic of today. One thought was, would anti-natalists say that all life is evil or just human life? So yes, that was one thought, if you want to say something to that.
Yeah, okay, if it's okay. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I don't think they would say all life is bad, but that specifically human life is bad, at least for them, because it involves so much suffering and misery and stuff. And I think they would say that animal life is in a completely different scenario. So I'm not quite sure. Perhaps some of them would say all life, but I think they only mean human life.
Yes, it's interesting because, of course, this isn't self-evident. I mean, if you look at all throughout the animal kingdom, there is suffering all the time. Like if a lion eats a gazelle, the gazelle is not very happy. And if the lion doesn't find a gazelle to eat, then the lion isn't happy. And there are all kinds of insects that eat each other, and parasites and sickness, and like there is a lot of suffering everywhere. But I think in that sense that, as you have presented it, it seems almost like a religious question, because there is this idea, or at least that's the way I understand it, that when when God created the humans in paradise, they were basically like animals, and then they had this original sin. And I think, in my mind, this represents the development of consciousness. And what these anti-natalists seem to say is not specifically that the existence of living being is bad, but the existence of consciousness, because consciousness in some sense increases suffering almost infinitely, because an animal only suffers in the moment, but a human being is always conscious of an infinite number of possibilities how he could suffer in the future. And therefore, even if you are not suffering in the present, you are still kind of suffering, because you know that bad things are probably going to come. And so I think we could try to approach it from that direction, from consciousness, and maybe even from this kind of religious perspective too.
That's an interesting point you bring up there about consciousness. Now, it is the case that according to the creation account, you have the first human beings having consciousness before the fall of man, and they have intelligence and will, but then they become weakened because they sin. So human beings are by nature different from animals when it comes to the mind, the intellect, and the will. And I think, as you point out, we see a difference in the sense that we human beings can anticipate suffering in the future. We can reflect upon things, and we can comprehend badness or that which is bothersome or inconvenient or even painful. We can sort of take it to a deeper level than the animals do, with the which have and they have only the instincts and very primitive intelligence. But with our intelligence, which is able to conceive abstract ideas and understand abstract things and comprehend things, we can anticipate suffering and thereby have our existence on another level than animals, to put it that way. So yes, that might be the anti-natalist understanding. Perhaps some of them would deny this, and others would affirm this specific point. Yes, I think on a deeper level we could approach this subject on the deep question concerning, well, what makes human life or human existence good or bad? What makes it valuable? Is it pain and pleasure? Is that all that accounts for a good or bad life, or is that the standard? And when I learned about anti-natalism in this philosophy lecture, the arguments more or less were connected to this utilitarian or hedonistic account of human existence, that you have pleasure and you have pain, and that is sort of the standard. And it seems that, if I remember correctly, that anti-natalists were arguing that in life there is very much inconvenience and even pain and suffering, and the pleasures of life seem not to outweigh that. And therefore, if we weigh the pleasure and we weigh the pain against each other, then the pain or suffering or inconvenience is greater, and therefore, on a total level, human life is bad. So we see sort of this metaphysical, or not metaphysical, but meta-ethical. Yeah, of course, everything is boiling down to metaphysics ultimately, but we can see that they have this ethical view of utilitarianism, in a sense, at the bottom. So that is how I will sort of approach a question of, is that all that matters in life, or are there deeper realities or phenomena or values that determine whether it is good or bad to live?
I think that's a very important point that you bring up here. What should be the standard of measurement by which we decide such a question, which is, of course, a very deep philosophical question. Is life or existence worth it? Is it actually good in total? I just quickly wanted to insert also a thought that I think is important about why conscious life might be more bad than unconscious life. And that is not only when human beings comprehend what suffering is and how they can suffer in the future, they simultaneously also comprehend how they can make other people suffer in the future. Jordan Peterson talks about this in his biblical series. And that's why basically the discovery of time is simultaneously also the discovery of evil, because a lion just tries to kill a gazelle because that's just what a lion does. He just eats gazelles. But a human being can purposefully inflict pain onto another human being without any necessity, just for the sole purpose of inflicting pain onto this other human being. And this kind of cruelty is on another level, I think, than what happens between unconscious animals, or at least that's how it seems to me. So yes. Maybe you want to say something to this, and then we can go on to the standard of what makes life good or bad.
Yes, a question of clarification. So when it comes to the phenomenon of imposing suffering on other people and harming others, would that be understood, according to the view you explained, would that be something bad for the person who imposes that suffering, or for the person receiving that suffering?
That's a good question. I think I'm a little bit difficult to answer. I guess from a utilitarian point of view, it would certainly be bad for the person receiving the suffering, but it could, in some sense, maybe be said that it's just bad for the whole existence of the whole thing. Like if you do something bad, but at least for a purpose which is good for some other people or group of people, then at least it's not just all bad. But Jordan Peterson uses this example from the concentration camps, the German concentration camps, where the guards would have these half-starved people, the prisoners, pick up 50 or 100-pound heavy sacks full of sand and then carry them all the way from the gate to the other side of the prison, and then carry them back to the start, just to make them suffer and to show that you are actually suffering for nothing. Because in the end, the sandbag is in the same place where it was in the beginning. It was completely, didn't produce anything, but you suffered. And so in that sense, just this whole mode of existence seems to be bad. I can't formulate it much better.
Right. Yes, that's interesting. That is sort of talking about the reality, total reality of the situation as bad in itself. And I can also mention that both according to Socrates, I think Socrates argues this, as well as Christianity would argue that if you impose harm on others, you would actually harm yourself in the process. I think Socrates is talking about if you do injustice to others, you're actually harming your soul. And Christianity would also affirm that if you are severely harming others, you're committing a mortal sin and thereby killing your own soul. So you're actually harming yourself by harming others. So that's also a very good point to bring up in that regard. Okay, yes. So then there is the question of the standard by which we determine whether a life is good or bad. because we see that this meta-ethical consideration is this sort of foundational for this whole issue. And we see that today there is very much, we can see a huge amount of influence by the utilitarians on different issues, that pain and pleasure, that seems to be a very huge factor in how it's a factor that people use to determine whether something is good or bad. It seems to be used so much by so many people. But a response to anti-natalism would, for instance, be, as I have argued, a statement that life is actually about deeper things than mere pain and pleasure, which we also have touched upon in earlier conversation, that you have these deeper values of life, such as love and joy and virtue, that are more than just a question of pain and pleasure. There's something deeper. And we could say that we human beings, by virtue of being moral creatures, we have this amazing gift to promote moral goods, to promote virtues, to promote self-sacrifice, courage and wisdom, and all sorts of great virtues that are in themselves good. And we could understand the goodness of a human life based on this enormous gift we have to have this capacity for love, for virtue, etc. So that would sort of be my, we could say, response to the anti-natalist. So yes, life may be miserable when it comes to lots of bothersome inconvenience or suffering here and there, but there are these deeper values that everyone has the potential to realize and pursue.
I think it's very interesting, this whole question. I have some thoughts, but it's not yet fully I can't formulate it yet. We will have to drag it out a little bit. So you said that there is a strong influence today of this utilitarian thinking, and I would agree that that is the case. And you also said that, I'm not sure, did you say that there is something missing from that, or did you just say that you would stipulate a different base for a good life, which has to do with practicing love or virtues like courage or wisdom or self-sacrifice, like practicing actions that are in themselves good, and then it doesn't matter so much about the suffering or the pleasure?
Yeah, I would say that the utilitarian premise is wrong, that we are looking at the wrong place by trying to look at pleasure and pain, that's the wrong place to look, and we should look elsewhere to determine the standard by which we determine whether a life is good or bad. And we see this utilitarian influence very much in anti-natalism. I remember that on this lecture, there was this comparison of existing in the world versus not existing. So if you exist, yes, there might be some joys here and there, and there might be some pleasures, but there is a lot of misery and suffering as well. But if you don't exist at all, then there is no suffering or pain whatsoever. There is just complete neutrality, nothing whatsoever, just the absence of suffering altogether. So they would sort of look at it, okay, the advantages of existing, the advantages of not existing, and the disadvantages based solely on pleasure and pain, and thereby conclude that non-existence is the better option according to them.
Yes.
I would say that's wrong.
Yes, I see. So you are saying, okay, they are looking in the wrong place. We should have a different system of value that we use to measure whether a life is or was worth living. And I guess I would agree with you. I guess that you need you need something that makes you that makes life worth living, so that you can cope with the pain and the suffering. I think that's what Jordan Peterson would say, and I would agree with him there. That it's not, I don't know, it's not so much that the goal is just to feel good, but that if you have a true meaning in your life, a truly big and convincing goal, which you kind of, which is not just very temporal, which is long term, which is kind of stable in your character, then this will help you to overcome the pain and the suffering. So yes.
Yes, that's a good point. And also I could mention that even if we use the utilitarian premise, even then there is anti-natalism is questionable, because when one measures pleasure and pain, one can also take into account the question of, well, how do we measure those? How do we measure pleasure and pain? It's not really possible. And how do we evaluate different kinds of pleasures, different kinds of pains? And also there is the question of, well, we don't know the future of our existence. That's another problem with anti-natalism. Let's say you have a 30-year-old guy who concludes that, you know, it would be much better for me if I never existed. Let's say he concludes that at the age of 30. Well, he still has many years left before he probably dies a natural death at an old age. And he doesn't know what those years will bring. Perhaps that will bring many meaningful experiences that he hasn't experienced yet. So this conclusion is also can never be, you could say, verified, because you haven't finished your course on this earth. Because when you have, you will be dead, and then you cannot explain to anyone whether your life was bad or good or bad, because now you don't live on this earth anymore. So there is this question of that as well, that, well, we don't know the future. So how can you make a judgment about the totality of your existence? It's a problem. So those are also considerations, I would say. But yes, to what Peterson talked about, that you must find a way to deal with the pain and suffering and relate to it in a manner that is healthy, to put it that way, or can give you meaning and joy. Yes, absolutely. I think that is very connected to the idea which I propose, that life is about these deeper things. And if we have these great things like virtue and self-sacrifice and love, then we can deal with the suffering and pain on a very healthy, in a very healthy way. Yeah.
Yes. I think, I mean, there are good, these are good logical criticisms that you mentioned just before about how will you measure pleasure or pain, and also about how you don't know the future. But I think you then said you don't know, when you are 30, you might have a lot of meaningful experiences in the next 60 years of your life. But the point is, probably if you are a strict utilitarian, in the sense that you only seek to maximize your own pleasure and minimize your own pain, then the chance of you having a lot of meaningful experiences is very, very small. Because I think what I started to learn over the last couple of years is that meaning always has to do with something which is greater than yourself. Even if you have the best feeling by eating something very tasty, or listening to some good music, or I don't know, having sex or whatever, taking drugs, but still after that it feels hollow, because there was no purpose. It wasn't for something. It's just, now it's over, and now it's like as if it had never existed. So there is not any purpose to it, and therefore there is this great line in a song that I really like. Once the mind learns to serve a purpose greater than itself. And I think that's really the thing that's the problem here, that at some point in your development, you have to learn that you can't find the meaning of your life in just fulfilling your own pleasure, but you have to serve something which is greater than you. And then I think this whole thing changes, because then you have a different standard of measurement if life is actually good or bad. And at the same time, you will experience more meaning and therefore more positive emotion, even if you have pain and suffering.
You bring up some good points there, and also I would say that this dependency on the human person of something beyond itself to have a sustaining and good qualities in life, I think that reflects a general metaphysical principle or fact that I would formulate this way, that all kinds of creatures of any kind need something beyond itself to sustain both its existence and its health. That is true for all created things, and that also counts for human beings, that we need something beyond ourselves to fulfill ourselves. So that's very, very true. And I'm not sure what the anti-natalist would say to that, but it's a very true principle. So yes, there are these considerations that needs to be taken into account when it comes to, yes, meaningfulness and pain and pleasure, etc. To what end and to what purpose do you act the way you do? Is it for something else or someone else like God, or is it just for a temporarily thing, or yourself, in a sense that you are just promoting pleasure for yourself here and now, which is intrinsically unstable and not sustainable at all, because that sort of pleasure will just evaporate before your eyes. It's nothing stable that you can rest on as a foundation. So that's also a point that we would like to bring out. That's why people who always pursue pleasure always want more, because it's not a stable foundation to rest on mentally.
Yes, I think that's also a good point, that when you pursue this, you always want more, because it's like with any kind of drug, you have to increase the doses because you are kind of getting used to it, and then it's no longer feels like an improvement, because okay, now here I am and I can eat great food whenever I want, but then it's no longer something special, then it's just something normal. And then you need something even more extreme. And so you see this actually with many kind of false centers around which people can build their life. So it's the same thing with people who desire power. Well, okay, now you have some power. Well, what then? Well, you need more power. And then you need more and more and more, because as soon as you just stop and remain constant, then there is no more improvement, and then there's no more positive emotion associated with it. Or also like the people who do very extreme sports. Well, as soon as you did something, then you need to do something even more extreme, because this is now no longer very extreme. So it's no longer creating this sensation. And so I think that's a good point that you brought up there. And also, I like this, how you formulated it, that all creatures are dependent on something outside of themselves to sustain themselves and to fulfill themselves also. It's just, yes, you are a part of a system. You are not just like an independent entity that just exists and just feels good by itself. If that is your goal, then yes, life is probably not good. And Peterson also said that in some talk. He said, well, if your only goal is to pursue pleasure and to avoid pain, then perhaps existence really is bad. But then that maybe also just means that you have the wrong goal in mind.
Yes, that's a very good point, and Peterson has really captured a very important thing to consider there, which the anti-natalists don't consider, and it's really you could say it's really wonderful also when you think about the potentials that human beings have when they live, that there are so many ways they can live a life where they use the pain and suffering in a healthy way, that they have this love and they have self-sacrifice and virtues and all this, which they can thereby have this pain and suffering, but still, you could say, master them, and thus have a very beautiful situation with your life. And this moral greatness, if you want, is something that all people can actually practice. Now, I will say that you need the grace of God to actually do it because of the Christian dogmas. But still, even then, everyone has the possibility to gain that grace to actually become a person with these and other kinds of virtues. So it's really great when you think about how many things or how many ways you can use your life in a good way, that life is truly a gift. And that should always be the mentality. I could also mention that today we see many people who seem to talk about having children as a burden, but it should really be viewed as a gift, that you are bringing human beings into existence that are meant for greatness, moral greatness, and have the potential to live a meaningful and good life. And that should always be viewed as a positive way. So when it comes to this anti-natalist philosophy, not only is it wrong, but it's also destructive, and it must really be replaced with a view of life that affirms the beauty of life and the gift that life truly is.
Yes, and I think I was just reminded here, and it fits very nicely to what you just said. And it's somehow of a paradox. I think somewhere in the Bible there is this saying that those who will give everything will gain everything, or something like that, and those who will keep everything will lose everything. And I think this is exactly the point here, that what you have to learn is, and this is very difficult, I struggle with it myself often, it's to give yourself to others. It's not, because these anti-natalists seem to have the perspective that you should take as much pleasure for yourself as you can. And if you do not get enough pleasure, then life is bad. But it's actually just the opposite, because the more you try to take everything for yourself, the less you actually feel connected to other human beings, or humanity, or the world, or God, or I don't know. But if you give yourself to others, then I think you will receive a very warm feeling of love and care in exchange for that. And then it will actually feel much better in some sense to give this, to sacrifice what you yourself want for what someone else wants. will make you feel better, and to keep everything as you want it will make you feel worse. Now, this shouldn't mean that you should never have anything for yourself that you want, but I think you shouldn't only try to have everything for yourself.
That's a very good point. And related to this is also the very interesting reality that if you try to gain happiness or joy by capturing pleasure, then you wouldn't actually get it. You would only pursue it in vain. But if you do not try to focus on pleasure at all and just try to focus on the good, the moral, the virtuous, and just focus on that and self-sacrifice, then the joy and the happiness will come out of that as an effect of those goods which you are pursuing. So it's actually the reality that the less you focus on the pleasure itself, and the more you focus on the true goods of life, then those, you could say, that the pleasures or on a deeper level, the joy or happiness will just come out of it, even if you focus on the goods rather than those experiences, to put it that way. So that's very interesting phenomenon, that the less you think of yourself, the more you actually help yourself, to put it that way. And that should be the mentality of human beings. I think that's a very important point. And it's important to recognize, as for instance, Saint Thomas Aquinas pointed out, that pleasure is not the good in itself, it's only a side effect from some good. So to look at pleasure, that's just the side effect. That's the wrong place to look. You have to look at the source, the good, and then the effects of that will come automatically by looking at the good in itself.
Yes, I was just thinking of this point by Thomas Aquinas myself as you were talking, that the good feeling is a sign of that you are doing something which is good. And so you shouldn't pursue the sign, but you should pursue doing something good, because then the sign, which is the good feeling, will automatically follow. And on the other hand, if you only try to basically satisfy your desires but never actually do anything good, then more and more the good feeling will stay away, because you aren't actually doing anything good. So why should there be a sign that you are doing something good when in fact you aren't? So it's kind of this paradox that the more you chase it, the less you reach it, and vice versa.
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. Very good point. So we see that it's the good in itself which really fulfills us, not the good feelings. That's just an effect which comes afterward, and you shouldn't try to pursue that. You should pursue the good in itself. And if you just try to pursue the good feeling without actually having the good to have, then the good feeling will just, it wouldn't really be what you're looking for, and you will recognize that. So you wouldn't really be happy while just looking at the good feeling. So that's important to recognize that, yeah, the good feeling is not what you should pursue if you don't have the good with it. Yes. So that those are very important and good points that needs to be recognized. Those are both deep philosophical points, but they are very practical and useful for life. It concerns something that every human person is interested in, which is happiness. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? And to affirm true things or true answers to that, that's very, very important. And identify what we truly are looking for. We're not looking for some side effect, we're looking at that which is good in itself. And I would argue that that which is the supreme good, the good in itself, which is identical to goodness, would be ultimately God, and therefore we would only be fulfilled in Him. So there you also can have the Christian perspective on this as well. So yeah.
Yes, and I think also that just this what we were discussing right now, or what you have summarized, it shows that not always the easy path is the good path, because really trying to achieve the good, or to do the good, or to understand what is actually good, it's a difficult path, because it's not just obvious what is truly good. And so you need to follow this path, you need to value truth, and you need to truly want to know the answer to this question, what is the good? And you need to be willing to search for it, and to go maybe an uncomfortable road to find this answer, because it's not just doing some things which I expect will make me feel good, but it's no, I have to do what actually is good. And for that, of course, first I need to know what actually is good, and that's a very difficult thing to find out. And so it's not the easy road which leads to happiness, I guess.
Good points that you bring up there. Yeah, when it comes to whether it's easy or difficult to find the good in itself, I would say that we can through reason conclude and find out that which is good in itself is God. Perhaps that's something we can elaborate on another conversation. But yes, we have made some very good points to refute anti-natalism in this video, and emphasize the deeper values of human existence. It's not about pleasure and pain, it's about this goodness and morality and virtue. Those are the deeper things in human life that really demonstrates to us that anti-natalism is false, and that human existence, it's not a curse, it's a gift. And it's a gift that everyone can use for a good end. And that's you could say beautiful to realize. So yes, I think that was an acceptable summary of what we have been talking about this conversation. So I suppose we could end the conversation, unless you have anything you want to speak about.
I would want to add something, and I was just thinking that now that we have talked about this, we could perhaps say not just that anti-natalism is wrong, but perhaps it would be more suitable to say that it is a very unripe philosophy, that it's just, they haven't looked deep enough. It's like, I almost feel like the people who have this philosophy, who are grown up or aged adults, they have somehow not reached an essential stage of human development. Because I think at some age, it's actually appropriate to just try to maximize your pleasure and minimize your pain. But then as you grow older, perhaps I think that stage might be somewhere when you are an older child or a young adult. But then at some point, the development should set in, and you should start to realize these things that we have talked about now, that, okay, I have pursued pleasure for a long time, and I have found that it has never truly fulfilled me. But then that doesn't mean that the whole existence is evil, but perhaps it means that you need to learn something more. And you need to learn, as we said, that the good lies, or that you should serve something which is greater than only yourself.
That's an interesting point. So we could say that anti-natalism is immature. In other words.
Yes, immature is the word I was searching, yes.
Right. Yes, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yes, I would say that we can, during our whole life, when we have gotten to the age of reason, we can understand that we can actually pursue certain goods and moral goods and virtues. And yes, and a rational person will recognize that. So we can truly say that anti-natalism is wrong and irrational and immature and evil. Actually, it's evil because it attacks a very beautiful thing concerning life and human existence.
Yes, and I guess the problem really comes then when you are a person who should have grown past just pursuing your own pleasure, but still are just pursuing your own pleasure. Then it starts to become an evil. I think if you are, for example, a child, then I wouldn't say that it's necessarily evil. But I was just thinking that also this might also be an indication how wrong this philosophy is. If you take two people and you put them side by side, and one of them has truly learned to sacrifice his own pleasure and his own desires to make life better for his loved ones and his whole community. And next to him, you have a person who is just trying to maximize his own pleasure. The first person would be so much more admirable and so much greater when you look at them, that you can see this is a much more developed human being. The other one is kind of missing something essential.
Yes, that the person who has these great virtues, he's more mature in a sense.
Yes, and people will automatically admire him and see him as like kind of a great example of how great a human being can be, even though he is suffering internally, but still he is an example of greatness.
Yes, that's very true. It's very admirable and beautiful and inspiring. And such persons are good role models for people to consider when they have a truly virtuous person who cares about goodness. So that's very true.
Yes, and I think other than that, I have nothing more to add. It was a very good and productive conversation. And I think also, as you said, for practical life advice, not just very theoretical somewhere.
Yes, we see that it is theoretical, but also practical. That's a good thing.
Yes,
say.
That's actually great that they come together.
Yes, and I would say that about philosophy in general, that it's theoretical, but also practical.
I would say that about good philosophy, yes.
Yes, that you could say that.
Yes, so I thank you very much for having this conversation with me. It was very pleasurable.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to repeating it.
Yes, same here. Thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. And yes, as you said, it was productive and good, and we talked about important things. And I hope also the audience who watched this video had some good things to learn from this. And I wish both you, Amos, and the audience a great Wednesday.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
You too. Goodbye.